Point of order, Murdo Fraser.
Presiding Officer, can you just clarify for me a point of parliamentary procedure? I understand there is no government amendment to this motion today. Nevertheless, I had always understood that, notwithstanding that, the government would be entitled to have an opening speaker in this debate. I notice you did not call a government speaker in the debate. Can you advise why that was?
Thank you, Mr Fraser. Yes, the Scottish Government has elected not to put forward any representative, and that is not a matter for the Chair. I call Fulton McGreggor to be followed by Craig Hoy, up to 6 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I say at the start something that's not been mentioned yet? Can we all just remember that we are talking about a colleague here, a man with a family and someone with feelings, and I think it's important that we do reflect that. The motion brought forward by the Conservative Party today was intended to act as a debate on whether Michael Matheson should resign as an MSP or not. However, in reality, what it is served to do is expose a sanctions process that does not retain the confidence of all political parties in this chamber. We are now in a situation where the integrity of the sanctions process has been brought into question. This case has made it apparent that the Standards, Procedures and Public Appointments Committee process is open to prejudice, bias and, importantly, political motivation. Surely we can all, I'm going to make some progress, Mr Ross. Surely we can all agree that this is a system that needs to be totally unbiased. As it stands, the parliamentary process we have as MSPs to stand in judgment of each other has been brought into serious question. Let us be clear, Michael Matheson was indeed found in breach of the MSP's Code of Conduct by the Scottish Parliamentary Corporate Body, not just now, Mr Kerr. Michael Matheson acknowledged the mistakes that he made, and I believe they were genuine mistakes he was not initially aware of, and then paid back the full amount of the data roaming bill. There has been no cost to the public purse. Because of this incident, the Standards, Procedures and Public Appointments Committee was granted through standing orders the ability to propose sanctions on the member by a motion to the Parliament. While everyone in the chamber can agree that a sanction is necessary when a member has contravened the Code of Conduct, the process of determining sanctions, how they are developed, are opaque and lack clear guidance. It is within this ambiguity that politically motivated decision-making and bias can arise, and it is due to these biases and motivations that such a disproportionate sanction was brought to Parliament today. Not just now, Mr Kerr. I'm aware there's people wanting to come in. I will try if I can. Before this case was brought to committee and before any evidence was heard, social media posts by Stephen Kerr and Annie Wells, who are both members of the committee, commented on the issue and questioned the integrity of Mr Matheson. These posts clearly indicated that they had prejudiced opinions. Now, I welcome Stephen Kerr's decision to step down from the committee, citing that it would have been wrong to sit in the committee having previously made public comments on the case. Mr Kerr's decision set out a clear precedent about the conduct Parliament should expect from members who may sit. I am talking about facts in this instance, though. Members who may sit in judgment on cases of this type and in many ways mirrored the conduct of Chris Bryant MP, who also recused himself recently. The other member, however, did not step down, and after publicly prejudiced the case, then put forward the politically motivated sanction that we have before Parliament today. In addition, not just now. Presiding Officers, I wait, stop heckling. I have said I'm not taking interventions just now. No, and I'm not taking them just now. In addition to this,
Mr McGregor, could you please resume your seat a second? It is perfectly within the right of members to ask for an intervention, and it is entirely at the discretion of the member speaking whether or not they take that intervention. If I consider that the attempts to make interventions are done in bad faith as a means of disrupting the member on their feet, I will intervene. At this stage, I do not judge that to be the case. Point of order, Stephen Kerr.
Just on that point, it is in good faith if a member mentions another member that they consider taking an intervention. Is that a fair point to make in terms of the order of this chamber?
As I said, Mr Kerr, it's entirely at the discretion of the member who has the floor whether or not they take an intervention. Fulton McGregor, please continue and I can give you the time back.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I accept your judgment on that. In addition to this, details of sanctions and discussions were leaked to the media ahead of the publication of the final decision, and as far as I know, no investigation into the leak has taken place within the committee. The confidence in this system is at a low and reform is needed. There have been sanctions in the past, including one for the member who we are discussing here, who was excluded from all meetings of Parliament for leaking an embargoed committee report to the press. But in previous times, there have been sanctions imposed. There have been no guidelines on what sanctions should be imposed, with the development of sanctions decided solely by the committee on an ad hoc basis. Not just now. There is no right of appeal, and it is now becoming glaringly obvious that sanctions decided by MSPs can be subject to party political biases. There is too much room for politically motivated decisions when no guidelines exist. I will stress that I am not saying there should be no sanctions, but the sanctions need to be proportionate, transparent and fair. I am not the only person to suggest that the process is open to political interference. In 2008, when the Standards Committee proposed just a one-day ban from Parliament for failing to declare leadership campaign donations as gifts, at that time Jackie Baillie, MSP, said, and I quote, "Wendy Alexander has paid a high price for a report that some commentators have described as partisan. Some members may regard what they have done as a political victory, but wiser heads will reflect on the consequences for the Parliament and for democracy. Let the wiser heads in this Parliament dismiss the report, which is unfair, unjust and frankly plain wrong." End quote. The amendments... Yeah, I'll take an intervention there, Michael Matheson.
Michael Matheson.
I greatly appreciate the member giving way. Doesn't it recognise in the case that he states what actually happened here was that a member who knew that something had gone wrong, that there had been a mistake, and then thoroughly misled both the press and Parliament when he knew fine well what had happened. That is a breach of the standards in public life. It's not comparable to the situation that he regards where people disclosed what had happened. The situation we're looking at here is where there's a clear breach of faith and where the standards of public life were broken.
Fulton McGreggor, and give you the time back.
I accept that the member's point. He's right to make that point. But the point that I was making is that I'm not the first person to say that this process is open to political bias, because your colleague Jackie Baillie made the same point in 2008, and therefore what I'm saying is what I'm coming to in the two amendments is there might be scope to change that. Now, the amendments brought forward by the Labour and Green parties in today's motion address different areas of concern. I'm happy to look at them in a bit more detail. The Labour amendment seeks to introduce a recall system similar to the one used in Westminster, and this amendment is one that I and my party colleagues are happy to support. However, the system can only be introduced if members have complete confidence in the way it is utilised. If we were to emulate the Westminster recall system, it must also include an independent process which contains a right of appeal, and I know that other members have made that point as well. Likewise, along with party colleagues, I am happy to support the Green Party's amendment, which underlines the need for reform and the current weaknesses in the process and procedures, and the amendment also comments on the disproportionate nature of sanctions and the need for clear guidance on sanctions. And importantly, the amendment stresses the need to have confidence in the system while condemning the committee leaks and prejudicial comments. On that note, I'm happy to take Annie Wells.
Annie Wells, briefly.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would just like Fulton McGreggor to reflect on what he said, saying that I was suspended from this Parliament for leaking a committee report. I was suspended for commenting on an already leaked report, not leaked by me.
Fulton McGreggor, and if you could be winding up now.
Okay, I know the members had the chance to put that on the record, and thank her for her intervention. Presiding Officer, in conclusion, the issue has highlighted the clear need for reform in our sanctions process. Michael Matheson has been a key member of this chamber since the Scottish Parliament was established. He has been a powerful legislator, introducing almost 20 bills to this chamber in his time in government, including the Historical Sexual Offences Pardon Bill, the Human Trafficking and Exploitation Bill, the Management of Offenders Bill, the Vulnerable Witnesses Bill, the Domestic Abuse Bill. The last of these, I remember, being a very emotional day, and there was tears all round. And I mention this because this is an MSP who actually cares about people. And of course, Presiding Officer, these are just some of the examples of good legislation that Michael Matheson has introduced to Parliament. His record also includes voting for progressive policies and voting to mitigate cruel policies of this UK Tory government. Rather than resign, I'd say it's true we actually need more MSPs like Michael Matheson who legislate to stand up for those in our society who need support and protection. What we don't need
Mr. Kerr, resume your seat, and Mr. McGregor, conclude your remarks.
Use a privileged position to heap misery on the most marginalised in our society. To sum up, Presiding Officer, I will be supporting the amendments introduced by Labour and the Green parties this afternoon. The Chamber must have confidence in our sanctions process, and this politically motivated attempt to remove a member by handing out an incredibly disproportionate sanction has highlighted the urgent need for reform. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr McGregor. I now call Craig Hoy to be followed by Paul O'Kane. Up to 5 minutes. Mr Hoy.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'm not sure which doors Fulton McGreggor is knocking on, but clearly not doors on the same planet that we are all on, because he would understand that the last thing that people are asking for are more politicians like Michael Matheson. Deputy Presiding Officer, the old adage that the cover-up is worse than the crime reverts to the fact that attempts to conceal wrongdoing can lead to more severe consequences than the original misdeed. However, in the case of Michael Matheson, both the misdeed and its cynical concealment will rightly shock anyone who believes in public service or justice. Mr Matheson emerges out of the scandal as someone who cynically sought to put his own career and his bank balance before the reputation of this Parliament. Someone who fought to save his own skin when he should have been fighting to save our NHS. Someone who has given repeated opportunities to tell the truth about an improper expenses claim and simply did not. Presiding Officer, the sum of money involved is not just eye-watering, it is also pertinent and it is instructive. It exposes why Michael Matheson may have decided to break the rules of this Parliament and, in so doing, break the bond of trust that exists between MPs, MSPs and the people we serve. Had Mr Matheson returned from Morocco to discover a roaming bill of £11 or £1,100, I suspect he would have just paid it and moved on. But the fact that it was the staggering £11,000 must surely have been a determining factor when he decided to risk his career and his reputation, which now lies in tatters, by loading this cost onto the taxpayer. Now, Mr Matheson still has questions to answer, but I suspect he will dodge them today, just as he has done in the past. But questions still remain for the former First Minister and indeed for the present First Minister. Humza Yousaf stood by his Minister, who he described as a man of integrity. Why? Mr Swinney stands by his friend and refuses to sack him. Why? What does Mr Matheson know? What grit is he aware of in the SNP's oyster that he cannot be sacked? And why is John Swinney burning political capital to prop up his pal? These are all very valid questions. But where is Mr Swinney today to answer them? And why is nobody from this government willing to stand at that front bench and account for their actions today? Now, I want to turn to the First Minister's shocking attempt to smear my colleague Annie Wells, a stunt that has spectacularly backfired this afternoon, as chaos rules in this Parliament, with the SNP's motion passing, but then the SNP not actually voting for the amended motion. Presiding Officer, Mr Swinney is meant to be the brains of the operation, and if that is so, no wonder many people think that the operation is in serious trouble. In an act of political self-harm that must frankly have astonished even his own colleagues, Mr Swinney has sought to lay the blame elsewhere. Last week he mounted a pathetic rearguard offensive to deflect attention from the fact that he was and is continuing to defend the indefensible. John Swinney cynically sought to focus on process rather than do what every single one of my constituents wants him to do, which is to sack Michael Matheson forthwith. And for the record, I'm proud to have Annie Wells as a friend and as a colleague. I'm proud that she's willing to speak the truth to power. I'm proud that she stood her ground as a member of this Parliament Standards Committee. And I am proud that she did not bend or buckle under the sustained pressure of the SNP's cynical and orchestrated attempt to discredit her reputation. Our constituents are rightly appalled by the actions of Michael Matheson, but they are now equally appalled at John Swinney's mismanagement of the affair. The Scottish Conservatives and the public will welcome the sanction proposed and voted for today, but it's clear that it does not go far enough. It's not good enough that Mr Matheson has been sent home without pay. He should now be sent packing along with his P45. But he still has time. At the 11th hour, Michael Matheson can admit now that the game is up and resign. And if he doesn't, then John Swinney must dismiss him from the SNP. And if the First Minister fails to do so, then in key seats right across Scotland, voters can pass a verdict on Michael Matheson and on John Swinney and on Humza Yousaf and on Nicola Sturgeon and vote Scottish Conservatives to beat the SNP on July the 4th.
Thank you, Mr Hoy. I now call Paul O'Kane to be followed by Stuart McMillan. Mr O'Kane.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Wisdom, justice, compassion and integrity, those were the values that 25 years ago this Parliament committed itself to and that every parliamentarian must live up to. And they are inscribed, of course, on the mace at the front of the chamber. And Donald Dewar said on the opening day of this Parliament, and I quote, "We will make mistakes, but we will never lose sight of what brought us here, to do right by the people of Scotland." And it is for each of us to reflect on how we do right by those who have sent us here. And to my mind, that means taking responsibility for our actions and responding accordingly. Claiming thousands of pounds from those people who sent us here, and then misleading the press and the public about it, I believe shows no wisdom of judgment. I believe it shows no integrity in holding yourself to account, and it shows a lack of compassion for those who are sitting watching our proceedings aghast at what has taken place here today. And I think that that damages all of us and the very institution of Parliament. The events of the past month, and particularly of the past week, have, I think, shown an utter failure on the part of the SNP, and in particular John Swinney, to do anything to guard against that damage. We have had the unedifying spectacle of the SNP and the First Minister spending weeks and months trying to defend Mr Matheson. Just 1 week ago, rejecting sanctions in an extraordinary performance at FMQs. Then this morning we heard they were performing a U-turn and they were going to back the sanction, and then getting themselves into the situation this afternoon where they sought to abstain. They did not vote on any sanction then at all, and then refused to vote for the motion which they had successfully amended. Unedifying spectacle, I think, is an understatement, Deputy Presiding Officer. And it is, of course, welcome that this sanction has now been applied, but there are still serious questions to answer around the judgment that has been exhibited by the First Minister and SNP members over the last week. Riddled with inaccuracies and reeks of prejudice. Well, that sounds familiar, but those are not John Swinney's words from last week, but rather the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson defending himself as the House of Commons Privileges Committee investigated Tory sleaze, including Partygate. Along with his allies, the former Prime Minister deflected and attacked Harriet Harman for having made public comments and, in his view, politicising the process. Now we have the First Minister, no less, and allies of the former Health Secretary making similar criticisms about the impartiality of the Standards, Procedures and Public Appointments Committee. And I have to say that some of the language that was used in this chamber this afternoon, particularly in relation to the convener of the committee, was outrageous. It should be a moment when we hang our heads in shame that this sort of behaviour has been imported into this Parliament, watched over by the SNP. Because these have been astonishing misjudgments from someone supposed to be the experienced set of hands and fresh leadership. But perhaps we should not be surprised, because sadly this is not new, and Jackie Bailey, my colleague, has outlined in some detail the record of failure in this regard by the SNP. It is clear that for months and years to come, if Michael Matheson does not do the right thing and resign, this saga will be recorded in the growing list of SNP sleaze incidents. And the SNP act with impunity and a hubris that this will never come back to haunt them. And all the while, faith in our politics and our devolved system slips further and further. And I think that is why, if Michael Matheson will not do the right thing and resign, that's why the Labour amendment is so important. It sets our belief that it is time for this Parliament to have a recall mechanism to empower our constituents so that they can hold us accountable when we fall short of the expectations that we set ourselves and that they have set for us. We have already seen the introduction of such a system at Westminster, and it was used here in Scotland in the Rutherglen and Hamilton West recall petition and by-election last year. Although I would point out that in the process leading up to that sanction of Margaret Ferrier, It was the SNP MP Alan Dorrans who sought to vote with the Conservatives to reduce her sanction to 9 days to avoid having a recall petition and subsequent by-election in Rutherglen and Hamilton West. So I think that tells you everything you need to know about the SNP's priorities. Party first, country and constituents second. And I think it is clear beyond doubt that this Parliament must have a right of recall. And it will be for Parliament to consider such proposals in the coming weeks and months. But today it is for Michael Matheson to reflect on his own behaviour. I'm sure, and my dealings with Michael Matheson have been that he is a decent man. He must now reflect on what has taken place. He must now reflect on the judgment and the view of this chamber. He must do the decent thing and resign. Or will he cling on? And if he does cling on, and this government continues to defend the indefensible, what is clear is that the public will sit in judgment of this saga and they will have their say very soon. But isn't it clear, Deputy Presiding Officer, that the people of Falkirk West deserve the same chance to decide who represents them in this place, who speaks for their community, and to have that opportunity for a fresh start? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr O'Kane. I call Stuart McMillan to be followed by Sue Webber. Mr McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Michael Matheson himself has indicated that he made mistakes and has been found to have been broken parliamentary rules and has now been sanctioned. It does go to follow that after the process that was in place, that the sanction would have been inevitable. This debate, however, in my opinion, is just sheer political opportunism. It's the debate following on from a sanction against an MSP, which we've just debated, which was undertaken, which was undertaken based on a process that is flawed and, in my opinion, risks bringing this Parliament into disrepute. The Standards, Procedures and Public Appointments Committee process was open to prejudice, bias and political motivation when it should be totally unbiased. And if we were supporting a constituent with a case where the process was clearly flawed, we would highlight the flaw so that a constituent could get a fair hearing with their issue. In any court process where a jury is to be used, consideration is given to the make-up of the jury so that that jury can be made up of independent people with no link to the case they are about to sit on. The why then... Okay.
Patrick Harvey.
I'm grateful to the member for giving way. With the best will in the world, if that was the position the SNP was taking, should it not have brought a proposal to amend the sanctions and then vote for the sanction it thought was appropriate, rather than refusing to back any sanction?
Stuart McMillan.
Yes, I think certainly today we had to listen to the debate. Obviously, it's entirely up to others within the government with regards to what amendments or not that are going to be taken forward. But nonetheless, I think we did have to listen to the debate in terms of what was being proposed today. Now, and certainly, Presiding Officer, why then would this Parliament allow a process where one of the committee members had already prejudged the outcome but still remained on the committee to then vote through on their considerations? What highlights this contradiction is even more as the fact that another member of the committee recused himself for the very same reason. And I do want to congratulate that member for doing so. Now, Stephen Kerr resigned from the committee in March 2024, and he said, and I quote, "I concluded that I couldn't meet the committee requirement to be unbiased towards Michael Matheson and his conduct in public office." And he also went on to say it would have been wrong, having made so many public pronouncements. And he also continued, "And for due process to be observed, I feel I must resign from the committee." And would he give way? Absolutely.
Stephen Kerr.
Because for the record, it's important to state that I, in that same set of quotations, called upon Michael Matheson to resign as a member of this Parliament. Because in any other workplace, if you attempted to take £11,000 of expenses that were not due, you would face instant dismissal. And that is all that the motion before this chamber does today. It recognises that this workplace is no different than any other workplace.
Mr McMillan needs to have the chance to respond.
Thank you, President Officer. So I acknowledge the comments that Mr Kerr just made, but I also acknowledge the fact that his comments that I quoted in the chamber were actually comments I suggest actually indicated that he did want to have an independent process in his considerations with regards to this inquiry. But, Presiding Officer, the complete lack of consistency in approaches, in my opinion, is galling and does the committee and also this Parliament absolutely no favours whatsoever. Now, I've had a number of constituents contact me about the situation, some who favour a sanction and some who are very much against. However, when someone contacts me, and somebody did, claiming that the committee was, and I quote, acting like a kangaroo court, I think that says it all. Those are the comments from a constituent of might not want to hear it, but those are the comments from a constituent of mine. Now, I genuinely don't understand. I genuinely don't understand why the Conservatives actually thought it would be fair and beyond reproach to keep Annie Wells on the committee. Now, the next point of contention is something that every Parliament and committee suffers from, and those are the leaks from private discussions. Now, they've happened before, and sadly will happen again. However, what has been reported last week actually supports the consideration that the committee has acted with prejudice, bias and also political motivation. And despite the committee having just 5 members in there, details of the sanctions and the discussions were leaked to the media, with the Daily Record reporting on Wednesday 22nd, ahead of the final decision on Thursday 23rd, that, and I quote, the record can reveal suspension will be the sanction, but MSPs were divided on whether it should be for longer than 10 days, and a Holyrood source said there was a view on committee that the optics would be bad if a 10-day plus sanction was applied and Matheson stayed on as an MSP. Now, the final line in the committee report also indicates, and this was referenced today by the committee convener, and I quote, that finally the committee notes the disappointment that material relating to the committee's deliberations appeared in the media prior to the decisions being reached and announced. Now, I'm not sure if any investigations into the leak have been asked for by the committee convener, and I do note the comments from the committee convener in the earlier debate. But what has happened highlights yet again that a fair process was not going to happen. It also begs the question as to why the reported 10 days changed to 27 days overnight. Now, so what changed? Now, a cynic would say that the calling of a general election and seeing an opportunity to push for a by-election on the same day. Now, in my opinion, I do believe it's time for the SPCB to initiate an independent review of the Parliament's complaints process to restore integrity and confidence in the parliamentary procedure. Now, if no review takes place, we are in trouble, and no one will or should have faith in the process again. And members of the Parliament now and in the future need to rely on, to trust and have confidence in the Parliament's processes and also procedures. Presiding Officer,
Mr McMillan, I take it you are concluding. I
am, yes. So the Labour amendment today is something that I've got absolutely no qualms with whatsoever. But it's absolutely crucial that people recognise and realise that in Westminster they have the recall process, but they also have an independent complaints process with the Independent Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards. So if we are to have any type of recall, we need to have the independent process before we get to that point.
Thank you. I call Sue Webber to be followed by Marie McNair. Up to 5 minutes, please, Ms Webber.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Today, the Scottish Conservatives have brought forward this motion calling on Michael Matheson to resign as an MSP for misusing taxpayers' money and making misleading statements. Surely it should not need the Scottish Conservatives to do this. Michael Matheson should have resigned for misleading the public and Parliament long ago. And frankly, the SNP's subsequent handling of the situation has been appalling. Doubling down, they have put their party before the people of Scotland, and Fulton McGreggor appears to be saying the SNP position is, we need more Michael Mathesons. I'll tell you what. In the real world, you would lose your job for what Michael Matheson did. In businesses across the country, large and small, misusing your expenses is a sackable offence. It is black and white in the world outside this parliamentary bubble. Yet First Minister John Swinney has chosen to defend the SNP MSP, his friend. The Scottish Parliament Standards Committee has recommended Michael Matheson be suspended for 27 days and a 54-day salary withdrawal, which we have voted for earlier this afternoon. The penalty should have been and could have been far more severe. Yet despite a cross-party group of MSPs reaching this conclusion, including SNP MSPs, John Swinney has said the investigation into Michael Matheson's 11,000 data roaming scandal has been prejudiced. John Swinney said, and I quote, "Michael Matheson has made mistakes. He resigned and lost his job as a member of the Cabinet, and he paid his roaming costs in question. There was no cost to the public purse. I do not believe that the sanction can be applied." Has he conveniently forgotten that Michael Matheson's claimed £11,000 for roaming charges on a family holiday was reimbursed for? It was agreed with Parliament that the bill would be paid out of the public purse, including £3,000 from his own office cost allowance. That's all taxpayers' money. There was no cost to the public purse, as stated by the First Minister, because several months later, Mr Matheson came clean and eventually paid it back because he was found out. And then last week, I was also stunned to witness John Swinney turn on my colleague Annie Wells during First Minister's questions. Sitting next to Annie on Thursday, I felt the full ferocity of the attack as it was made, all while attempting to portray his friend Michael Matheson as a victim in this whole sorry situation. It was quite something to behold. Let's remember that SNP members on the Standards Committee alongside Annie Wells also felt that Michael Matheson should be sanctioned for this. So this performance by the First Minister was completely unnecessary and uncalled for. And what's more telling is how the public watching FMQs from the gallery that day perceived the entire sorry situation, and how out of kilter with public opinion they were. And that came after First Minister's questions with me last week. Because immediately after the session, I popped to the chat room, where we often go after FMQs to meet pupils from our area. And I met with S3 and S6 pupils from Forrester High School. And it is a shame that the First Minister is not here, because I don't have to tell him where that school is, because that's the school he attended. They had just been in at FMQs, and the very first question came from a young lad, and his hand shot up and went, "What's this all about an iPad and £11,000? And when they found out, the chat room erupted. They were absolutely scunnered, stunned, and thought it was outrageous. So my first question would be to the First Minister, if he was able to be in the chamber this afternoon, was does the SNP think it's a good idea to send a message to our young people that it's OK for our politicians to not tell the truth in public office and abuse taxpayers' money? But to be honest, I'm astounded that this sorry saga got to this point, because at the same time as the iPad scandaling was unravelling, this happened to me. In Edinburgh, we have a £2 flat bus fare, or a cat fare, if you're hopping off and on all day. That's often the mode of transport I use to get to meetings and surgeries across my constituency. I had submitted an expense claim for a bus fare, and this time I had not provided the information that explained when I got on the bus and then when I got off the bus. I had to redo that claim for a £2 bus fare. Given the rigour and email exchanges that took place for that £2 bus fare, I can only imagine the email exchanges pinging back and forth, justifying an £11,000 roaming bill. And I want briefly to touch on Jackie Bailey's amendment. My colleague Graham Simpson this afternoon has already spoken at length about the process that he's developing for his Members' Bill on establishing processes to achieve that recall. One element of this bill is to consider establishing that system of recall, I'm repeating myself, for MSPs. I'm conscious of the time. In all parties, most parliamentarians go into politics with the intention of serving their constituents dutifully and to the best of their ability. However, in all parties there are examples where representatives have abused their position or have failed to meet the standards that the public have the right to expect. John Swinney has displayed a staggering lack of political nous by defending the indefensible Michael Matheson from sanctions approved by all members, including SNP members, on the Standards Committee and voted on today. It speaks of fatigue.
Ms Webber, you will need to conclude.
I am. It speaks of fatigue and desperation, and I have no
Ms
doubt
Webber,
it
you're
will
over
stick
the time
in
that
people's
the
minds.
manager asked for. Thank you very much. I call Marie McNair to be followed by Stephen Kerr. Ms McNair.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Michael Matheson made a mistake and has apologised for it. He has rightly paid the roaming charges in full at no cost to the public purse. Even though the investigation has been tainted when it comes to natural justice, what is proposed is one, not just now, I've just started, what is proposed is one of the largest sanctions in the history of this Parliament. Michael Matheson has shown genuine remorse and has taken full responsibility for serious matters that occurred. No person, regardless of position, is inhumane from making mistakes, but I recognise and agree elected members must be held to a very high standard, and I agree Michael Matheson clearly made mistakes. This was a mistake and he has paid the price. It's not a matter to resign as an MSP over. If the price for a mistake is resignation, then Douglas Ross should have resigned a long time ago. But we know that this motion is really... OK.
Douglas Ross.
I'm grateful to the member for giving way. Can she explain the SNP position today? They amended the motion to be the wording that they drafted, and then they opposed it. Can she explain to fellow MSPs and the public their thinking behind that?
Marie McNair.
I thank the member for the intervention. I actually thought you were standing up to concede, obviously, your double standards in terms of your £28,000
we need to
scandal,
speak through the chair, please.
Obviously not. Yeah. Apologies, Presiding Officer. The usual attempt to score political points instead of making a serious contribution to this Parliament is Mr Ross, an aggressive, shouty behaviour that Mr Ross should have left in the playground. What is especially evident this time is the breathtaking hypocrisy contained in his contribution, the hypocrisy that surely even he must have been aware of. We remember when Mr Ross reluctantly apologised for the expenses scandal debacle, the £28,000 expenses scandal, and no offer of resignation there, just a grovelling apology. I've taken your intervention, I'm not taking any more. To conclude, there are two choices available to them. Was it a muddle or was it a fiddle? And we accepted then that Mr Ross's version that it was just a muddle. But what a muddle it was too. He was quoted in a newspaper article at the time as saying he doesn't know why he failed to declare £28,000 and added the following grovelling apology that it was just a big mistake by me for something I'm deeply sorry, but I know how badly I performed here and how much I've let the people down. And for that, I'm very sorry. I've said I'm not taking any more interventions. So for Mr
Ross, the member's made it clear she's not taking any more interventions.
An apology was good enough, but not now. And this motion is a partisan move. It's not one done out of integrity or any morals. And if it was Douglas Ross, surely they would have more to say on the fact that this Tory party presided over Boris Johnson's Partygate scandal, the PPE scandal, the lobbying scandal, bullying claims about senior members of the Cabinet and the crashing of the economy that's inflicted hardship on so many. And that's just to name a few, Presiding Officer. The Tories are a party of misusing taxpayers' money and making misleading statements, and this is clearly a hypocritical, partisan and self-interested move. If our Tory colleagues cared so much about doing what is right, they surely would have called out those in their own party for all their wrongdoings over the decades in charge, but they don't and never will. If they cared about what was right, they wouldn't be presiding over the two-child policy and its abhorrent rape clause, and they would have acted to ensure WASPy women are fully compensated, and they would not have turned their back on those...
We need to hear from the member who has the floor. That is Ms McNair and none of the people who are making the noise at the moment. Please continue, Ms McNair.
And I'll repeat, they would have acted to ensure WASPy women were fully compensated, and they would not have turned their back on those impacted by the infected blood scandal for so long. No, the Tory motion here today is not about doing the right thing. It's political point scoring. It's a schoolboy-like attempt at scoring political points, and gut-wrenching hypocrisy just drips out of it. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms McNair. I now call Stephen Kerr to be followed by Alistair Allen. Up to 5 minutes, please, Mr Kerr.
Well, it's astonishing for me to be in the position of being held up by the nationalists as a paragon of parliamentary virtue. But I do take my duties as a parliamentarian very seriously, and I also take my responsibilities to all of my colleagues very seriously too. And the attack on the integrity of my colleague Annie Wells is unwarranted and totally unfair. And I would add, there have been comments directed to the convener of the Standards Committee this afternoon, which are a parliamentary disgrace. Of course, as someone who played a key role in the public disclosure of Michael Matheson's wrongdoing, and then went on to make serial comments about his guilt, it was right that I should stand down from the committee. But the assault on the integrity of Annie Wells is beyond the pale. It's one of the most despicable things that I have heard in this chamber as long as I've been a member of this Parliament. And the First Minister's conduct last Thursday, defending Michael Matheson, is something I believe he will never live down. What we got from John Swinney was all the fake piousness of nationalism. Party first, always party first. The SNP care only for party. Their own jobs, their own careers, well, there's news. The gravy train is coming to an end for the SNP careerists. And I have to say that the other astonishing thing that has come out of this fiasco is John Swinney's obsession with my social media. He sent 37 pages of my social media posts to the convener of the Standards Committee. He's my most active follower on social media. And it's also become clear that John Swinney would go to any length to defend Michael Matheson. I wonder why. The evidence of the report, prepared by a fair and impartial investigator on behalf of the corporate body, upheld by the members of the corporate body, and the unanimous decision of the Standards Committee, with 2 SNP members on the committee, was that Michael Matheson falsely claimed £11,000. He, and I shall put this politely, deliberately misled the Scottish Parliament, the media, and the people of Falkirk West. He wasn't engaged on parliamentary business in Morocco. The bill was racked up watching football. He didn't try to claim £11,000. He claimed £11,000. He used £11,000 of taxpayers' money for his own personal use. And outside of this chamber, that is called misappropriation. And it was the lowest of low points in this chamber to watch an SNP Cabinet Secretary, Michael Matheson, throw everybody and everything under the bus to save himself. And he was aided and abetted by not one, but 2 SNP First Ministers. Party first, everything else second. And the First Minister chose to scapegoat one of the most conscientious members of this Parliament, my colleague Annie Wells. And John Swinney should be embarrassed, because the reputation of this Parliament is hanging by a thread because of the actions of Michael Matheson and because of the appalling judgment of John Swinney. If we had the appropriate legislation in this place to do as they do at Westminster, Michael Matheson now would be facing the judgment of the people of Falkirk West. But in the absence of that recall, in the absence of the powers of recall, Michael Matheson, if he had a scintilla of integrity left in him, would immediately resign. I worked in business leadership for over 30 years, and I can tell you in no other walk of life would it be acceptable for someone to fraudulently claim expenses and for that person to expect to stay in their employment. They would face instant dismissal. And the people of Scotland know it is only in this Parliament is it possible for someone to do what Michael Matheson did and to feel so entitled to think that they can sit it out without any prospect of dismissal. And I would add, any thought of a police inquiry, because any casual reading of our newspapers tells story after story of employees who do exactly what Michael Matheson did, who have been subject to criminal proceedings. Presiding Officer, the people of Falkirk West can't have their say, but the members of this Parliament can. And if we have any regard whatsoever for this institution, then we must vote this afternoon to call on Michael Matheson to do the decent thing to resign immediately and to leave public life.
Thank you, Mr Kerr.